I'm Candy Johnson, and I'm a librarian here at the Penfield Public Library, and I'm the host for today's gathering, and I'm going to welcome you all. And I'm going to present and turn this meeting over in just a moment to our presenter, Arthur Catalanello. And I'm so glad you're all here to attend our first attempt at a virtual presentation of social media and the job search. Arthur's program will probably last about an hour, and then leaving a good 30 minutes or so for Q&A. And I can't think of anything else I should address at this moment. So thank you. And if subsequently you have any questions, you can always address them to Arthur directly, or you can contact me at the Penfield Public Library. So I am going to mute myself and let Arthur take over. Thank you so much.
Okay. All right, so today I'll talk a little bit about myself and my background, talk about job search overview, a personal branding overview, because that plays an important role in job search, talk about social media in general. I'll take a slightly more detailed look at Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, do a brief look at Pinterest, Instagram, blogging, and infographic resumes, and I'll also do a basic strategy on putting this all together. Some extras that aren't necessarily social media related, but are still useful in job search. And then at the end, we'll have time for Q&A. So my background is I went to Ithaca College for television and radio production. First major job out of college was at Harvey Research, where I measured the effectiveness of print and digital advertising. Got laid off from Harvey Research twice. There won't be a third time. In between, I had a contract gig at Xerox where I was an interactive media specialist. I did some social media for them. I worked at Paychex for about 2-3 years in their employer shared responsibility department, which is Affordable Care Act compliance. Not a very thrilling job, but it was good experience and good people and a good company. I'm currently at Monroe. You may know them locally as Monroe Muffler, Monroe Automotive, and Service Centers. They own about 1,300 stores nationwide under 9 different brands. And I presently am responsible for local listings, which is if you look up a store on Google, Google My Business, I am responsible for the content that appears there, content that appears on Yelp pages, and I also am in charge of reputation management, which is basically online reviews and things like that. And I do a little bit of social media and video production work at Monroe. I also have a consulting business on the side, which is what this presentation falls under. I volunteer with the August group. I've been there for about 11 years doing social media for them. So here's what job search looks like in the year 2020. It looks a lot like job search in 2019, if you've seen this presentation before. These are all different factors that come into play at some point for most people. And while the circles are all equal, that doesn't mean that they will be equal for you. We don't have a crystal ball. We don't know exactly what's going to be the biggest domino that's going to fall in your search. But all of these should come into play at some point along the way. So there's social media and electronic networking like LinkedIn and Facebook and things like that. There's personal branding, which is, we'll talk about that in a second. There's continuing education. This presentation would fall under continuing education. There's professional assistants such as recruiters and things like that. In-person networking, which during COVID times is a little harder to do face-to-face, not impossible. But things like Zoom meetings would fall into that. And then there's just traditional methods, right? There's job boards, there's different job ads that you might come in contact with. So some of the things that are different now in 2020, there's more job seekers and there's fewer jobs. So that means greater competition. And so that's why social media and some of these other tools are important. There are more remote jobs today than there were in previous years. There's a greater emphasis on video interviewing. So that's something that you may or may not need some help with. So that's something that should be practiced because it is, if you haven't had one yet, you probably will. There's an increased usage of ATS systems, applicant tracking systems, which are automated systems that companies use to screen candidates and screen resumes. The hiring process is taking longer. That used to be a huge pet peeve for me when I was looking for work. You know, you'd apply for a job, and sometimes the process start to finish would take 2 months. It's taking longer. There's still a big black hole where you don't hear from a lot of companies, which is really frustrating. But it, you know, patience here is a virtue, because the hiring process is taking a lot longer. Businesses are increasingly concerned about the short term because they don't know if they're going to survive COVID. So, you know, there's really been a change in how businesses approach open jobs. This is a slide that I thought you might find interesting. I'm not going to read this all to you. When you get the presentation, you can look at it. But I thought the one stat that stood out to me is social media continues to be a rising star when it comes to seeking new opportunities. 42% of their survey respondents say that they found job openings on social media, which is a 10% jump from last year. So if you Google JobVite, JOBVITE.com, you'll see they put out an annual survey that incorporates data from both hiring managers and recruiters, as well as job seekers. And it's interesting because there's sometimes a disconnect that they show. They'll show stats like, you know, X% of job seekers are online on this particular platform, but recruiters are at a higher rate than what job seekers have. So obviously that's an issue because you want to be where hiring managers are. So let's talk a little bit about personal branding because that plays an important role here. The best way to think of personal branding, besides what is written on the slide, is that at the end of the day, you're going to be one of several dozen, perhaps several hundred applicants. So what makes you unique compared to everybody else? Is it a skill set? Is it a combination of experiences? Is it an accomplishment or two? What's different about you, right? You know, for those who are local, and I'm assuming most of us are local, but since this is the web, you never know. But is Wegmans just a supermarket, or is Wegmans Wegmans, right? There's something different about Wegmans that is, you know, is their brand. So that's kind of how you have to think, right? You have to start thinking of yourself as a brand, and you have to audit your online presence. So that means if you have different comments that are out there that might be sensitive or questionable to a prospective employer, you need to figure out, you know, Google your name, look for where you are, what's your digital footprint, make changes to it, improve it, delete things if you can. One of the best ways to develop your personal brand is to secure a personal website. And there, we'll talk about this later, but there are free tools out there that you can use. It can be as simple as one page, because if you're solely relying on LinkedIn as your personal brand, your LinkedIn profile looks like everybody else's LinkedIn profile, right? You have the picture where the picture is, you have the headline where the headline is, you have your job history, it's all the same font, it's all the same size, everything is identical. So you want to do something that helps you stand out. Securing a personal website is a great way to do that. Find ways to produce value that can be sharing content with people that you're connected to. Be purposeful in what you share. Social media is fun, right? We all have fun. We all have hobbies. We all have interests. And you can share those things. But when you're job searching and you want to use social media as a job search tool, you need to be a little more purposeful with what you share. And it's only hopefully short time. And then you can go back to sharing all the fun stuff that you like to share. And that's not saying you can't share fun things. You just have to be a little more thoughtful about what you are sharing. Try to associate with other strong brands and individuals. I am fortunate enough to call Hannah Morgan a friend. I've done presentations with her. She has an amazing reputation internationally when it comes to job search. So at the end of the day, I'm happy to ride her coattails. And you know, we refer business to each other, and we promote each other's content, and that's great. You know, it's great for me, and hopefully it's great for her, and it's not just a one-way street. Number 7 is really important. What's your unique value proposition? What's unique about you? You need to try to figure that out so that you can then develop that and really hone in on that when you try to promote yourself. Other things with personal branding, you want to identify target markets. And what that means is you want to be real specific with where you apply and when you apply. Companies can see if you apply for 8 different jobs at that company, and it is not viewed very positively. So you want to be real specific with, with your target markets. You want to stay up to date. You want to be visible. So all the things we're going to talk about today, it's not as simple as, oh, I didn't have a Twitter account, I'll set one up, and then you never tweet. That doesn't do any good. So for the platforms that you do decide to participate in, you need to be visible. You need to use those platforms. One of the other ways you can be helpful is to be a source of relevant information. Give something back to your profession and your community. For me, this is a way I give back. I've learned these things over the years. I've been doing this presentation or a variation of it for over 10 years. It's a way I can give back and help others. Create a networking database. It just makes it easier. Don't rely on LinkedIn and the limitations of LinkedIn. LinkedIn is constantly changing, not necessarily for the better. So make sure you keep track of who you know and when you've contacted them. Practice an elevator pitch, a brief message to deliver that talks about your strengths and your interest and what you're looking for. And 10 goes without saying. That's why we're here, to talk about developing an effective social media presence. So I've talked about social networking, social media real broadly. You have to give to get. You can't, you wouldn't walk into an in-person networking event. Let's pretend COVID doesn't exist. You don't want to walk into a room of 50 people and introduce yourself and say, hi, I'm Arthur. I'm looking for a job in marketing. Can you help me? That's such a huge turnoff. So you have to figure out how you can help the other person, and then they're more likely to help you. And it has to be a give to get type of proposition. In social media, you have to remember the social in social media. It's different than traditional media, traditional marketing. If you're Wegmans, again, to pick on Wegmans, they have a message, they push it out to the masses, whether it's on TV, radio, in print. But social media is the opposite. It's about attraction. It's about pulling in people. And, you think about it, if you have a DVR at home and you're able to fast forward during commercials, you probably do it, right? So let's take Facebook. If you choose to follow businesses on Facebook, why would you do that? Why would you subject yourself to advertising? It's because the companies that are good at social media give you a peek behind the curtain. They give you something that's interesting, useful, funny. Maybe it's a private offer, a private deal. So there's reasons why you've chosen to follow those companies. It's about attraction. So that's what you have to think about when it comes to that. Here are some ways where you can be social. Because again, I said, don't do social, be social. So be interesting, be human. There are tools where you can automate messages. Don't do that. It's just, people see through that. If you're helpful, people will want to help you. We've talked about being focused with your messaging. One of the things you have to do with social media is you have to be able to give up control. If you post something and you're like, oh, I probably shouldn't have posted that, it's out there. People can screenshot it, people can forward it. So you have to be really careful with what it is that you do. And you need, social media can be a great listening and research tool. So, and we'll talk about some of that. And lastly, if you're active in social media, you're more easily found in social media. So this is what the social media platforms look like today. There are over 4.5 billion internet users across the globe, and over half of them use social media, one or more of these platforms. And actually, the average person has 8.6 social media accounts. And as active as I am in social media, I don't have that. So I find that number a little high, but it is what it is. But again, we'll talk about Facebook. We'll talk about Instagram. They're on that top row. Facebook owns Instagram. So that's one of the reasons why Instagram is as large as it is. And then in the bottom row, we'll talk about Pinterest and Twitter and LinkedIn. So why would you want to use social media? I don't get a commission if you use it. So, you're not going to hurt my feelings if you decide at the end, it's not for me. But it's the third leading source strategy for companies after getting referrals from existing employees, as well as those who've applied through their applicant tracking system. They use, recruiters will use it because it's fast, it's very affordable, and they can vet the quality of the candidates more easily using social media. So one of the things I got involved with at Monroe recently was helping the HR team manage paid Indeed ads. They're expensive, but if I put out a post on Facebook that this particular location is hiring an automotive technician, that was a free post. So that's why a lot of recruiters turn to it. And because so many recruiters are using social media, at the end of the day, you want to fish where the fish are, right? No sense casting your line out into a pond where there are no fish. So if recruiters and hiring managers are actively using social media, that's the biggest reason why you want to do that. Pardon the drink. So Facebook, let's talk about that, mostly because it's the largest social media platform in the world. I have it. I like to use it for fun. If you have it, I'm sure that's why you want to use it. There are ways that you can use Facebook that allow you to still have fun, but also allow you to promote yourself professionally. And the two don't have to mix, they can be separate. So we'll talk about that in a minute. The stat on this page that really jumps out to me is 87% of coworkers have connected with at least one other coworker. So while in your head you may be thinking, well, it's LinkedIn and it's LinkedIn only, a lot of people are connecting with coworkers on Facebook. So that could be a reason why you might want to use Facebook. One of the biggest advantages of Facebook is its authenticity and personality. LinkedIn tends to be very corporate and buttoned up, and you're only sharing professional content. With Facebook, it's a lot more casual. It's a lot more fun. People tend to be their truer self on Facebook than they do on LinkedIn. So that might be one way, one reason why you'd want to use it. Another is chances are you're connected on Facebook to people that you might invite over to your house for a backyard barbecue, let's say. They're going to be neighbors who you're real close with. They could be friends. They could be family. And who's going to help you if you needed help more than people that you're really close to, right? I'm connected to, I don't know how many people on Facebook. For me, that stat isn't necessarily important, but they're people who I know very well. On LinkedIn, I'm connected to a bunch of people. Some I know very well, some I know, just more casually through business interaction or networking. And if I really needed help, I'm going to reach out to the people, friends and family who I know very well. So that's a reason why you might want to use Facebook. There are all sorts of valuable groups and pages that you can like or join on Facebook. And that can be really useful too. You'll get to learn more about a company's personality on Facebook, assuming that they have a business page. Most companies nowadays do. Using Facebook, you definitely want to make sure your privacy settings are customized. And I could teach an hour-long class just on that, but we don't have time today. But Facebook has done a better job in recent years of walking you through how to set your privacy settings, showing you what your profile looks like to people that you're connected to, showing you what your profile looks like to the general public. So make sure you take the time to customize those settings if you're worried about a prospective employer seeing things that you just don't want them to see. But make sure your contact information is visible and you have the opportunity to include a link or more to either your LinkedIn profile, a personal website if you set one up. So make sure that's definitely visible publicly. And if you choose to, share content that's professional in nature, change the setting of that individual post to something that might be seen in a broader way outside the people that you're immediately connected with. Watch what you post publicly. You can lock down your own account's privacy settings, but once you go out and comment on something else, maybe it's an article that the DNC puts out or some other Facebook page, that's public. So just because your account is private, what you post on someone else's page can be public. So keep that in mind. Let's talk about LinkedIn. That's probably the social media platform that most of today's attendees have. It was founded in 2003, so it's been around a long time. Microsoft bought it. They've made a bunch of changes. Out of all the social media platforms, LinkedIn probably changes the most. So if you are the type of person that hates change, you don't like it when people move your cheese, it's going to be LinkedIn's going to be a tougher pill to swallow, but it's the one that is most closely associated with job search. So that's why it's probably the most important one to be on, especially if you're not currently on it. There are 2 million posts, articles, and videos published on LinkedIn daily. 95% or more of recruiters use LinkedIn. It's definitely the platform that you want to be a part of. There are 35,000 skills listed on LinkedIn, and 55 job applications are submitted through LinkedIn every second. So it's just a huge platform for job search. I mentioned before that that Monroe put out some open opportunities on Indeed. Those were scraped and put on LinkedIn as well. So you can apply through LinkedIn. It tends to be a cost-effective platform. The most overused profile world is specialized. I'm probably guilty of using that at least once in my profile, so it's just something to keep in mind. If everybody uses it, it's no longer effective, right? Just something to keep in mind. Break out the thesaurus and come up with a different word. There are premium accounts available in LinkedIn. Again, I don't get a commission if you decide to do a premium account or not, but if you're curious about what the costs are, what the benefits are, again, just for the sake of having a more concise presentation today, I didn't go into the details, but if you're curious, that link there will explain what those are. When you're using LinkedIn, you want to make sure that you complete your profile to 100%. And that's because of the search capabilities on LinkedIn. If you have a very sparse profile, chances are you're not going to show up when someone makes a search on LinkedIn. So the more detail you have in LinkedIn, the more likely you are to be found. One of the pieces of advice that I would give is to build a strong network. And for me personally, I value quality over quantity. It's at least equal, but for me, quality is a little bit better. I'd rather have a smaller network of people that I can count on and I know are active than a larger network and half of them just have a profile and they're not on there. They don't engage with anyone. One of the things you want to do is get recommended. So that's a little different than endorsement. Recommendation is more along the lines of in the old pre-social media days, at the bottom of your resume, you would say, references available upon request, and a business might reach out to those people and someone would have to write a letter of recommendation. Try to get recommended. The best way to get recommended is to ask for a recommendation or give a recommendation to someone else and see if they can return the favor for you. If you're in the running for a job and you have similar background, similar experience, someone who has a ton of recommendations, I'm probably going to call first if I'm a hiring manager versus someone that has 0 recommendations. So something to keep in mind. Again, you want to be active on the platform. You have to be active to be seen. So try to update your status at least 3 times a week or share content 3 times a week. You don't have to, but obviously the more you share, the more often you share, you're going to show up in the feed of the people that you're connected to, and you'll be top of mind. So I have people who reach out to me and say, hey, if you hear of any engineering jobs, let me know. If you hear of any accounting jobs, let me know. All right, I have 1,500 connections on LinkedIn. I couldn't name one person off the top of my head that fits either of those, but if they're active and I see their name quite often, I will probably remember them before I'll remember somebody else. So that's why you want to be engaged. You can also engage with posts, and that activity also shows up in the stream. So you can simply like posts, you can comment, you can share, you can do so individually in your feed, or you can do it in groups. And then there's a section that's relatively new. It kind of started during COVID, where you let recruiters know you're open to work. There's a graphic that can be overlaid on your profile picture. There's controversy whether it works or doesn't work. Try it. There's an article there on how to go about doing that. So something, I haven't used it personally because since COVID started, I've been employed. So I haven't had to use that open for work. When you use LinkedIn, you have the opportunity to add a photo to your profile. As you can see, it makes you 36 times more likely to receive a LinkedIn message. That's because pictures lend credibility to your profile. If you're just the shadow outline of a person that LinkedIn uses, I don't know who you are. And why don't you have a profile photo? Are you trying to hide something? Do you not have, the savviness, the tech savviness to know how to upload a photo? So definitely include a picture. Doesn't have to be a glamour shot, but it should be professional. So keep that in mind. As you can see, headshots and listing skills and all those add to a greater chance that you're going to be seen and or contacted. So I mentioned before that LinkedIn has a real robust search capability. So you can search for people and companies. You can do a Boolean search. If you're not familiar with what that is, definitely Google it. In a nutshell, it's the ability to search for, it's like doing an advanced search. So you can search for, let's say, accounting and Rochester. So anything that it returns in the search would have to have both of those terms. You could do accounting or Rochester. That wouldn't be as useful because you're going to get accounting jobs outside of Rochester, and you're going to get other jobs that are in Rochester that have nothing to do with accounting. But there are different combinations that you can do with, for me in marketing, sales always gets lumped in with marketing, and I'd never had any interest in sales. So for me, I could do marketing, not sales, and then it would return results that were marketing that didn't include the word sales. So the Boolean search is a real useful search tool. So if you're unfamiliar, definitely just quickly Google it and you'll find all sorts of helpful content on doing that. When you attempt to connect with someone, take the time to customize your invite if at all possible. There should be the ability to do that. And just, again, effective networking is give to get. Just mention to the person, hey, I'd like to connect because I think I can help you with X, and make it useful for that person. Remind them where you might have met, where you may know each other from. So take the time to customize the invite. You're more likely to have that invitation accepted. Join groups. There are a ton of groups on LinkedIn for all sorts of things, industry. There's local groups, there's Rochester groups, there's groups related to job search, there's groups related to alumni, whether it's your high school or your college. So take the time to join those groups. There's useful content often that's shared there. Participate, right? Again, you can read all the content you want, but by liking and by commenting on things, it's that interaction and engagement that makes you more likely to be visible and to show off that you have knowledge about your industry. There's a ton of jobs on LinkedIn. And I think the stat before was there are 55 applications every second on LinkedIn. You can create job alerts so that when a brand new job is posted on LinkedIn, you're notified of that, and you can select the frequency that you're notified. So definitely become familiar with the job capability and the job alert capability. One of the things you can do on LinkedIn is you can customize your LinkedIn profile address, the URL. And it's easy to do because LinkedIn, when you first create a profile, is going to assign you linkedin.com/in/ and then a handful of letters and numbers that kind of resemble your name, but not fully. And it's just from a personal branding perspective, it's not the cleanest look when you want to share your LinkedIn profile. So it's easy to do. Take the time to customize it. If you're unsure how to do that, you can search for it. You can always reach out to me at the end of the presentation, and I can share that with you as well. And my email address will be at the end. And check your privacy settings on LinkedIn. One of the things you can do on LinkedIn is turn off the suggestion of people also viewed this profile. So in other words, when you go and you buy something on Amazon and it says, hey, people who bought this product also bought these products. So if you're in job search mode, LinkedIn has something similar and it defaults to yes. So people who viewed Arthur's profile also viewed these people's profiles. Well, if I'm looking for work, I don't want a recruiter to potentially consider these other people, right? I want to be one-stop shopping. I want them to land on my profile and be like, yep, he's the guy. I'm done looking. So turn that off. That's in the settings. Again, I can, help you find that. But if you go under your settings, you should be able to see it. Quick pause here for some more. I'm not used to talking so long interrupted. So let's talk about Twitter. A lot of people in previous presentations don't have Twitter. Twitter is probably the easiest platform to use. It's as simple as posting content up to 280 characters and you're done. If you've been on LinkedIn and you've been on Facebook, you can figure out Twitter. Super, super easy. Twitter tends to skew younger, but you'll notice that one stat there, third up from the bottom, 77% of Americans who earn over $75,000 use Twitter. So just because it skews younger doesn't necessarily mean it's not a valuable platform. There's a lot of noise on Twitter. I've described Twitter as walking into a bar and there's just dozens of conversations happening simultaneously, and you can't possibly hear them all, participate in them all. So Twitter can be very noisy, but there are apps, and we'll talk about that in a second. There are apps that help you, narrow that and filter out the noise to make it a lot more useful for you. One of the reasons why you might want to consider using Twitter is that you can build and deepen relationships, and you can reach a new audience whom you would not reach otherwise. What I mean by that is when you connect with someone on Facebook, someone has to send an invitation, someone has to accept the invitation. Same with LinkedIn. Someone has to send an application, an invitation to connect, the other person has to accept. With Twitter, as long as it's not a private account, and even if it is, you can still, apply to follow that person. But Twitter, you can just decide to follow whoever you want, and they can choose to follow you as well. So if you start to engage with people on Twitter, then eventually, depending on how that relationship goes, you may be able to migrate that connection over to LinkedIn, where maybe it's more meaningful. So while you could take a siloed approach to these social media platforms, you could find somebody on Twitter and then look them up on LinkedIn, or vice versa. You could find them on LinkedIn, see if they have a Twitter account. So they don't have to operate separately in terms of how you use them as a research tool and trying to understand more about corporate culture and things like that. On Twitter, people tend to vent. So sometimes you can find employees on LinkedIn, look at their profile on Twitter, and you'll learn a lot more about corporate culture on Twitter, because there's so much noise, people feel like their content can be a little more, not anonymous, but it gets buried quickly. So Twitter is very reactionary compared to LinkedIn, which is a lot more formal and corporate and buttoned up. So if you're going to decide to use Twitter, my suggestion is use your real name and customize your profile name so that it's consistent with the other platforms you're using. So you don't want to be Arthur Catalanello on LinkedIn and, Giants fan stuck in Bills country on Twitter. Because someone who's finding you on one platform and not the other isn't going to easily make that connection. So you want to be consistent across the different platforms. You could also create 2 accounts if you wanted to. You could create one for fun, and you could create one professionally. But again, it's extra work to maintain 2 different accounts. And depending on the privacy settings, it's not like someone can't find what you're also posting on that other account. So just something to keep in mind. Watch what you tweet. That goes without saying. What you post out there can be screenshotted, can be shared. So just keep that in mind. If you decide to join Twitter, who would you follow? So some examples are prospective employers and their employees. There are local networking organizations that have Twitter account. There are local professional societies and organizations. In the HR community, there's the Society of Human Resources, Human Resource Management, SHRM. Most of those national professional societies have local chapters. They may or may not have Twitter accounts, so you can follow them. You might learn about a networking opportunity, a Zoom presentation that they may be hosting. So a lot of times you can find out useful things on Twitter that you may not find elsewhere, or as quickly or as easily. If you read any professional content, whether it's people who write articles, people who have a blog, a lot of time they use Twitter to promote that content. So you can follow them as a starting point. And Twitter gives you the ability to build lists. So I mentioned Hannah Morgan before. She's known as the Career Sherpa. So she's already taken the time to build a list of accounts on Twitter that specialize in resume content. Another list of people that specialize in like LinkedIn advice or whatever the case may be. And you can either follow her list as a whole, or you could browse her list and follow the individual people in that list if you wanted to. So a lot of times that's a way to start. And on Twitter, the search isn't as robust as, let's say, LinkedIn, but it still is decent. You can search for topics. You can search for those topics with or without a hashtag, which is the # before the name. You can subscribe. Certain applications allow you to subscribe to keywords, so you don't have to remember, well, what keyword did I search on last week where I found this person or this article? You can save those searches. And again, there are a lot of apps that are out there. And we'll talk about that in a couple slides here. I mentioned you can search for terms with or without hashtags. They will return a lot of the same content, but the content will be different enough. So I would suggest doing it both ways. You'll notice that these hashtags are all an uninterrupted string of letters. So you won't see rock jobs as rock space jobs. It's all one. On Twitter, when Twitter started way back when, a way to localize tweets is to include the airport code as part of the tweet. So for Rochester, it's ROC, Buffalo is BUF, so on and so on. There's an advanced Twitter search function, so I have those links down below that you can check that out as well. And I mentioned using apps, right? Twitter on its own is so basic. It's I wouldn't say it's useless, but it's not as useful compared to when you use apps. And if you can think of, boy, Twitter would be great if it could do X, chances are someone has developed an app that will let you do X. So in the beginning of Twitter, probably over 10 years ago now for me, in the beginning, as you're following people, you're looking at your follower count and when it goes up and all of a sudden overnight it drops and you're like, oh, who unfollowed me? Unless you wrote it down, you're not going to know. So, you might think, well, gee, it'd be great if I could figure out who stopped following me. There's an app for that. So again, just Google Twitter apps and the function that you're looking for, and chances are one exists. Most of them are free, and they're typically categorized into desktop, web, and mobile. One of the applications that I use is Hootsuite, and it allows me to schedule tweets. So if I wanted to, I could have a tweet go out right this second, even though I'm in the middle of delivering this presentation. So there are a lot of useful tools. Another nice thing about Hootsuite is because it's web-based, I can log in here at the Penfield Library and look at my account. I can go home and look at my account. I can go into work and look at my account, and I'll still be able to see the exact same content. The other thing that Hootsuite does is it allows me to split the stream, meaning I can create buckets of content. I can have a bucket for the Rochester media, Channel 13, Channel 10, our news. I can have another bucket for sports teams that I follow. I can have another bucket for companies I might be interested in. And if they tweet, they automatically fall into that column. So again, rather than seeing just a ton of tweets, I can go to that app and it's broken out into separate channels for me. It makes it a lot easier to get through the content. So that would be something I would recommend. If you're on Twitter and you just are like, it's okay, try an app. You might actually find it a lot more useful. Those are the three main platforms that people use for job search, but there are some others that you can consider. And Instagram is the first one that I'll talk about. It was founded in 2010. It's owned by Facebook. A lot of people post content every day. What you might want to consider on Instagram is a separate account for job search versus what you like to post about personally. Optimize your profile, include a link to your LinkedIn profile, to your web page if you decide to create one. Again, make the name of your account consistent with your digital footprint across the board. Include a profile picture. You can follow accounts just like you can on the other sites. Follow accounts of industry experts, people on job search, companies that you're interested in, prospective employers or hiring managers at those companies. And common sense things, just be professional, be public. If you have a private account, that doesn't do you any good to be found. So if you needed to, create those 2 accounts, but just continue to build your brand over time. What is it about you that makes you unique? What is in the industry? What's going on in the industry that people might find interesting? And you may gain some followers that way. Pinterest, also founded 10 years ago, skews younger, skews female. That doesn't necessarily matter, but there are a ton of items. Over 240 billion items have been pinned on over 4 billion Pinterest boards. If you're unfamiliar with Pinterest, think of it as a bulletin board that you might see somewhere publicly, like a town community center, something like that. But usually that bulletin board is just jammed packed with, lost dog, garage sale, and all these things all over the board that are just all covering each other up. Pinterest is a lot more organized. You create the boards, you decide what to call them, you decide what content to put in them, and so everything is systematically put into place. Makes it a lot more useful. Again, if you decide to use Pinterest, optimize your profile with your name, with your picture, with a description, with links. If you have any content that you want to keep private, you have an interest or a hobby that you just don't want people to know about, make it private, at least during your job search. You can always change it to a public board after. Not a ton of companies have Pinterest boards, but some do. You might learn more about a hiring manager's interests when you see it on a Pinterest board. You may find out that they're into sailing, and then you have an interview and you're like, hey, in doing my research, you have to be careful, right? You don't want to come across as a stalker, but you could say, hey, I see you like sailing, I'm into sailing too, whatever the case might be. So you can learn some things about organizations and about individuals. Let's talk quickly about blogging. It's not necessarily a social media platform, but it is something that's really helpful to a digital footprint. Blogging has grown. Blogging is a great way to demonstrate that you're a subject matter expert in your particular field. And there's great ways to create content. It improves, first of all, it's great at SEO, which stands for search engine optimization. It's basically the technique that allows Google to figure out what they're going to show you when you search for a particular keyword. And so the more you blog, the more Google picks up on that. So it's really helpful with being found. You can, one way, a couple ways you can develop content, because a lot of people are like, well, what would I blog about? And does anyone really care what I have to say? So 2 things you can immediately do for content is, one is most people have star stories or scar stories, which is, in an interview, and the hiring manager says, well, tell me a situation that you ran into where you had to discipline an employee, and what did you say? How did you resolve it? How did it go? Whatever the case might be. Most people have a handful of situations that they can share, a challenge they had to overcome, an action they had to take. And it's one of those things, if a tree falls in the forest, does anyone hear it? Did it make a noise? So it's great to have these star stories and scar stories, but if you don't have the opportunity to share it, it's just sitting there collecting dust. So you want the chance for people to learn about it. It's a way to demonstrate that you have a writing skill. It's, blogs are online. So in a way, you have a skill set that you can share that is demonstratable rather than just being something that sits on your resume as a line item. So it's a way to take, your digital footprint online can be very two-dimensional, like LinkedIn almost reads like a deluxe resume. But when you have a blog and you can include pictures and it's your writing style and you can inject a sense of humor, it really makes you a lot more three-dimensional than some of the other platforms by itself. So when I was first laid off in 2009, I wish I had blogged sooner than I did. I have a blog. I haven't added a post in probably 2 or 3 years now, but it is there. It's something that I would like to find the time to do, and it's something that I would highly recommend beyond social networking that we've talked about. Another key area is infographics and visual resumes. Again, this is not social media, but it's a way to be very social media friendly. It's taking a resume and turning it into a graphic, taking your accomplishments and turning it into a graphic. It's visual, so it's eye-catching. It's something that can supplement your resume. It can supplement your LinkedIn profile, but you can't apply for a job with it because it's not applicant tracking system friendly. So while I would recommend it, I wouldn't say spend a ton of time in it. If you're looking for a career that has anything to do with graphics, marketing, graphic design, anything like that, something like a visual resume would be really helpful. It's a way to just demonstrate your skill set. And if you're curious about learning more, I have 3 Pinterest boards listed there that will have examples of either infographics or visual resumes that you can see examples of, and you can go from there. So we've talked a lot about social media in a very broad sense, even though we've talked about specific platforms. So how do you tie it all together as part of your job search? So you want to use social media to build and grow your network. You want to use it to develop and maintain your personal brand. And if you need to, you want to clean up anything that could be sensitive or embarrassing. You want to use it as a research tool, both for companies, for corporate culture, to see if you might be a good fit for jobs. You want to identify key individuals at companies that you're interested in, and then figure out a way to follow them. You don't want to stalk these people, but you want to figure out maybe a strategy to interact with them. If they're posting content on Twitter, like their posts. If they're in a LinkedIn group that you're in, make sure you like their content. So you want to, gradually figure out how can I interact with these people so that I'm a recognized name when I do apply. The strategy that you use should be unique and appropriate for the platform. So what I mean by that is, if I was a business and I had a television commercial, I would not take the audio from that television commercial and assume it'll make a great radio commercial. So if you decide to post content on more than one platform, you want to make sure that it looks like it fits for that platform. How you post something on Twitter is different than how you post something on Facebook or LinkedIn. You can make it identical if you want, but really you would want to tweak that. Twitter, you would maybe use more hashtags than you would on Facebook. Just make it look like it fits the platform. You want to try to develop consistent interaction and engagement with people over time. And as I mentioned before, you can take a siloed approach to Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and all these other social media platforms, but you don't have to. You can use one as a research tool, find names, find businesses, and then go to a different platform and try to interact with them there. But my suggestion is, rather than biting off more than you can handle, take the time to really master 1 or 2 platforms before you move on to the others. So that would be my advice. I know in this day and age, people are really interested in remote jobs, so I wanted to take a minute just to talk about that. The process for applying for remote jobs is very similar to applying for a traditional job. It's all those same things come into play. It's online job boards and networking and everything else that we've talked about. But you want to include remote friendly skills on your resume. You want to include it in your digital footprint. And if you have any remote experience at all, that's definitely something you want to highlight. Sometimes businesses are worried about, can this person handle not being in an office surrounded by people? Can they handle working at home? So if you have any experience at all with having to report to when I worked at Paychecks for a period of time, this is pre-COVID, my manager was actually in Tampa, Florida. So I had, before COVID, I had experience working remotely for a manager, even though I was in a Paychecks office locally. So you want to include relevant keywords in your search. So we talked about Boolean searches before. You can do, marketing, jobs, and remote, things like that. So there are keywords that you want to include with your searches. Mentioned it several times, be visible to be found. Watch for scams. More than any other type of job, there are a lot of scams with remote jobs. So do your homework on the company, research people that work there, try to do, due diligence when you're looking for remote jobs, whether, before you decide to apply. And there is a way to specifically look for remote jobs on LinkedIn. At the bottom of that page, I've included a link there that will go into a little more detail about how you can go about doing it beyond the tips that are listed above it. Real quickly, these are some extras. These are not social media, but to a job seeker, you may find them valuable. So next.com is an online job board that you may or may not find useful. Most people have heard of monster.com and they've looked for jobs on Monster. What you may not realize is that there's a portion of monster.com that's a career advice forum. So you can go to Monster and you can look up articles about a company's interviewing style or their interviewing process or tips on negotiating salary, whatever the case might be. So their career advice forum can be helpful. Glassdoor.com, you can find jobs and see company salaries, reviews, and interviews. They're posted anonymously by employees. The caveat there is a lot of times it's former employees that are disgruntled and have an axe to grind. I left this company because they didn't pay me enough, or I got fired because my manager was incompetent, so you just have to take some of the comments you're seeing there with a grain of salt. Jobhunt.org is one that you may or may not have heard one. Go to your local library. There's lots of valuable content and materials at the library. Indeed, similar to Monster, has forums. They have a section on trends in your industry, salaries in your industry. There are Yahoo groups that you can join. Locally, PureNet is technically a Yahoo group. Yahoo groups are being retired soon, but before they do that, you may find some that are useful. If you are a graduate from college, go to your local alumni office and make sure you follow and engage with their digital footprint. At the end of the day, any college wants to be able to say, hey, we have these alumni in these great positions making all sorts of money. They want to be able to ask you for a donation. You being unemployed doesn't help either of those things. So make sure you engage with your alumni office. They can put you in touch with alumni that work at the companies that you're most interested in joining. I've mentioned a few times about possibly creating a personal web page. I use WordPress.com. I put together, if you go to my site and my URL is at the end of the presentation, I built that in a weekend. I got a WordPress for Dummies book. I taught myself how to create my own web page. Yours can be as simple as one page, basically your resume, but make it a little more graphical and make it look nicer. It could be 2 pages. It could be your resume and a blog page. So it can be as sophisticated or as basic as you'd like, but it allows you to control the brand. You control the way it looks, the way it feels, much more so than LinkedIn or Facebook or anything else. In the Rochester, New York area, because I would imagine most of the people online today are local, these are all organizations that you can look into. During normal circumstances, when there's not COVID, most of them host in-person networking. Since COVID, many of them have shifted to online networking and online programming. So you can You can follow them to learn more about when those events are. A lot of them share jobs. So you can learn about jobs that are posted there that may not be posted online on Indeed or some of the other job boards that you would traditionally go to. Use Google and set alerts. You can actually subscribe. You can create a Google alert for your name, for your industry, which would probably result in a ton of articles and posts, but target companies. So, you have a handful of target companies that you're interested in, rather than having to remember to go to their website to see what's new every week, every other day, however often you want to do that. You can set an alert so that if that company is in the news for whatever reason, you will get an alert about it, and then you can read up on it and learn about it. So it's one less thing to have to remember to do. About.me is like WordPress in that it's a customizable homepage that you can do. You might want to check that out. That may or may not be easier than WordPress. A site you can consider is brandyourself.com. So that will help you with personal branding and reputation management. So that's something that you can consider. Meetup.com, if you're unfamiliar with that, it's a way to find people and find topics and hobbies that are of interest and allows you to meet up. Obviously, during COVID, that's probably not going to happen as often, but if you were into golf, let's say, and you're like, I'd love to, I don't want to join a golf league, but I would just on occasion like to be able to find somebody that I can golf with. You can go to Meetup and find that. If you like to cook, you can go to Meetup and find that. So it's a way to meet different people with similar hobbies, similar interests. You can meet them that way, and then eventually migrate that relationship over to a connection on LinkedIn or whatever it might be for you. Jobscan.co allows you to upload your resume, upload a job description, and it will compare the two and let you know how closely your resume matches the job description. This is a really useful tool because, again, earlier in the presentation, I mentioned that companies are becoming more and more reliant on an applicant tracking system. And you could be convinced that you are a perfect fit for a job. But if it doesn't match the applicant tracking system, your resume isn't even going to make it to the next stage. So take the time to compare the two, customize your resume to that job description. It's more likely to go through. And if you want a backup version of that, you can go to cvscan.uk. It's very similar to JobScan. There are probably other sites, but there's two. Just remember that verb tense and acronyms can return falsely low scores. So you may, if you're using an acronym for a skill set or for an award or a designation or whatever the case may be, you may need to spell that out. Locally, Rochester Business Journal and the DNC have calendars online. Again, it's COVID. That may or may not be too prevalent, but it's something that you can bookmark and keep in mind. Rochester Works locally shares a lot of valuable content and jobs. Homework. Homework. Who likes homework? So these are some articles that I've read in the past that I thought, these are useful. Some of them are a year old. Job search hasn't really changed a ton in the last year or two. So, you may find the content in there really useful. The third bullet point, Career Sherpa. Again, that's Hannah Morgan. She's local, but she's been published nationally and internationally. You can subscribe to her blog. You'll get fresh content all the time. She does a Sunday summary. You can subscribe. It'll come right to your email inbox. You don't even have to remember to proactively go out and search for her content. This is a list of people who I follow on LinkedIn. They are either people that are involved with job search or specifically LinkedIn. You don't have to follow these people. I'm not personally connected to any of these people. I never sent them an invite. They never sent me an invite. But because I follow them, their content still shows up in my newsfeed when I go and log into LinkedIn. So I think you'll learn a lot of helpful things if you follow some of these people. And if you do and you don't like their content, you unfollow them and they're gone. So, no harm, no foul there. So in conclusion, one of the things you want to do is you want to think like a recruiter, and you can Google and reverse engineer. What I mean by that is, um, after today's presentation and after you get it by email, if you're like, all right, how do I look for a job using Twitter? What, what's that all about? You can Google, all right, how to look for a job using Twitter, and then you can reverse engineer that, or you can pretend you're a business. How do I find candidates using Twitter? Think like a recruiter does, and it'll tell you, all right, if you want to find candidates on Twitter, you have to look for A, B, and C. Well, then make sure on Twitter you have A, B, and C. Um, you need to be visible to be found. All of this is great, but if you simply set up an account and you let it sit there collecting dust, it does you no good. So you need to be visible. Um, Recruiters and hiring managers are using social media, so you need to fish where the fish are. It's the best way to get found. Use it as a listening and research tool. Make sure you develop a plan and a strategy, and then adjust as needed. So if you're trying a certain tactic and it's not working, don't stick with it. Adjust it as you need to. And at the end of the day, remember that social networking is a tool. It's not the only tool. There are a lot of things, as we talked about in the beginning, that require your attention. Can you find a job if you only do traditional methods? Absolutely. Can you find one if you only hire, like a recruiter to help place you into a position? Sure. But if you do these in combination, you're more likely to be successful, and successful sooner. So there is my contact information. You can send me an email if you're too embarrassed to ask a question in the chat right now, but you have a burning question, you'd rather ask me offline, you can certainly email me. You're welcome to visit my blog and my website. Again, the content at this point is a couple years old, but I think most of my blog posts are probably still relevant. You may find them interesting or useful, and you can certainly reach out to me that way. And those are the resources that I use today. If you're curious, you can go to one or more of those and learn more. But I'll leave that up for the time being. And I saw that some chats came through. So
There's a couple.
all right, so let's fire away. And if you have questions, between now and when we need to get kicked off, you can certainly put them in chat. So what's the first one?
Do you want me to? One question, which I don't quite, and I'm muted thankfully. It says, can you touch on when and how to use the pound sign
Okay.
or an ampersand?
Okay. So the question was touch on when and how to use a hashtag, which is the pound sign and then a keyword. So there's a couple of approaches. The best way to think of it is if you're on, let's say, Facebook, which probably most people are on, and you wanted to bold, italicize, underline a word just to make it stand out, that's one way you can use the pound sign. It's a way to draw attention. It serves two purposes. It draws attention to a keyword in a post, but it also gives you greater search capabilities on that keyword. So when I promoted today's presentation, I made sure I listed Rochester because it's local, but it doesn't have to be. I listed job search and I listed social media. Those are kind of the three main themes I wanted people to recognize when I shared my post. So those were the three hashtags that I chose. So I did it for two purposes: to draw attention to those keywords, but also in searches, hopefully my post would turn up in a result.
And that's the Michael Frowens.
Okay.
And he also asked, is there a way to shorten the URL in a post when writing?
Yes. So the tool I've used most often is bit.ly. It's bit.ly. And that allows you to take a really long URL like those right there. You take that, you paste it into bit.ly. So there's no .com or anything. Just type that in bit.ly. It'll take that URL and it'll shorten it down to like 5 or 6 characters. The downside is when you want to share that, because it's a random selection of letters and numbers, it can look suspicious to people. So there's a way to create an account with Bitly, it's free, and then you can customize it. So for example, that first link that I have on the screen now, socialmediatoday.com/news/the-ultimate blah, 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 blah. I could take a Bitly and call it LinkedIn cheat sheet. And it's a lot shorter and you still know what it is. And when people click on it, it redirects them to the real URL. So especially in Twitter where you're limited with the number of characters to have, Bitly is a great tool. There are others out there, Tiny URL. So you could always Google for URL shortener and it'll give you some suggestions.
Michael Frowns, does that answer your question?
Yeah, it did answer the URL question. The question I don't want to get, other people have questions too, but the other thing I'm still wondering a little bit about is in the body of a post, I sometimes see an ampersand with a name. And I'm not quite sure what's going on there. The hashtag itself is usually a list at the end of the post. But
on which platform?
LinkedIn.
On LinkedIn. I haven't really seen an ampersand in there.
Well,
I've seen the @ symbol as a way to tag other people, and obviously the pound sign allows you to create a hashtag for a keyword, but I haven't seen.
Okay, I got them reversed. I meant the tagging other people. I meant the
yeah. So the @ symbol is a way to tag other people. So let's say I decided to share an article by Hannah Morgan. So what I might do to give her credit, and just so she recognizes and sees, hey, I've shared your content, I may say @Career Sherpa. And then she'll be notified, hey, someone mentioned you in a tweet or someone mentioned you in a LinkedIn post. So it's just a way to draw attention to someone you want to see the post, because if I don't tag her in any way, shape, or form, unless I'm lucky enough to have her stumble across my post, she may never know that I referenced her, recommended her, whatever the case may be. So when I @ her name, she'll get notified that she was mentioned in one of my posts, and then she can directly check it out.
Okay, thank you. I was having trouble generating a post, and because I wasn't sure how to do those things. So thank you.
Here. So the next question is from Mark Levesque.
Okay.
On LinkedIn. What does update status mean? Is it just changing your entries for job history or skills or something else?
So update status is basically LinkedIn's default way of allowing you to post whatever you want. So you can say, looking forward to Arthur's presentation this morning. You can say, hey, I'm planning to attend, this online networking event that's scheduled next month. Here's a link if someone else is interested. It can be an article that you came across that you think people would find useful, whether it's industry specific for you or, might be job search. So it might be more broadly applicable to people that you're connected to. So it's just a way to, I think Facebook has some cutesy, what's happening or whatever they ask. So it's just, it doesn't have to be a true status when I'm still looking, or I landed in a new job, or, it doesn't have to be that. It can be pretty much everything you want.
Mark, does that answer your question?
Yep. No, that's good. I just wasn't sure whether it had something to do with your profile. So, because the last thing you want to do is send, oh, here's the latest profile update from yesterday.
Yeah, and speaking of that, there is a way where you can turn that off. So if anyone in attendance today is employed, not necessarily happily employed, but employed, and you want to work on beefing up your LinkedIn profile, but if you don't post often on LinkedIn and all of a sudden over the course of a weekend, you've made 20 updates to your profile, that looks a little suspicious. So there's a way where you can go to your settings and you can turn off share updates with my network when I do profile updates. So you can turn that off, do all your updates, turn that feature back on, and nobody will know that your profile is updated. It's not necessarily a bad thing to update your profile while you're employed. I mean, it's, loyalty is a two-way street, right? You can be laid off at any time. You could also leave at any time. So the fact that you've updated your profile shouldn't necessarily be a concern to an employer.
Okay. Arnold Bolt wants to know, are there ways to make infographic resumes ATS compatible if you are adept with Microsoft Word?
Not that I'm aware of. That doesn't mean it's a hard no. I'm just not aware of one. There are books out there like infographic resumes for dummies. And
actually, what I was saying was a statement that there are ways to do it if you're adept with Microsoft Word. Basically, if you create a Word document and then you overlay graphics over the text, the ATS will ignore the graphics and it will see the underlying text. So it takes a little bit of finesse and expertise in Microsoft Word, but it can be done.
That's good to know. Thanks for sharing that.
I do have one last question. I guess the question is if I'm currently employed, how do I inconspicuously look for a job so that it doesn't set off bells to my current employer?
So one of the things you want to do is perhaps turn off your profile updates that get broadcast to your network. So if you decide to tweak your profile, your employer doesn't see that. Read that link that appeared on, pull it up here. That link there on the bottom of that page. Let recruiters know you're open to work. Read that page specifically because it will let you know. I believe it lets other recruiters know you're open to work, except a recruiter at your own company for that.
Okay.
But let's face it, recruiters talk, right? HR people know other HR people. So, take that with a grain of salt. Just because LinkedIn doesn't broadcast it to them doesn't mean they won't find out.
Sure, thank you.
Yeah.
We'll try not to include recruiters to your own company, but we'll guarantee it. Something along those lines.
Any other questions? All right. If something comes up, feel free to reach out. My contact information was at the end of the presentation. The plan to send everyone a copy of that, so you'll have all those links. I didn't expect anyone to scribble that down furiously during the presentation. But feel free to reach out. And thanks everyone for attending.